I never imagined that a routine drive through the suburbs would unearth the kind of betrayal that shatters not only trust, but the very foundation of a life built on decades of love, sacrifice, and devotion. It was supposed to be just a quick detour passing by my son-in-law's house on the way home from a job site, maybe even stopping in for a friendly hello. But the moment I turned the corner and saw my wife's silver Lexus parked in the driveway, a vehicle that should have been locked safely in our garage, I felt something twist deep in my chest. An ache, a knowing, a premonition. Instinct told me to keep driving, but something stronger made me stop. Something deeper than curiosity. Something like dread. What happened next would change my life forever. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Your support means the world. It helps us share more stories like this one. Stories that peel back the layers of human relationships and remind us how fragile trust can be. I pulled over a few houses down and cut the engine. The air felt heavy, like the moments before a thunderstorm. My heart beat in my ears as I stared at that Lexus, gleaming like a silver lie in the sun. I'd bought that car for Elaine on our 20th anniversary, a reward for the years she'd spent standing by my side while I built our construction business from the ground up. Or at least, I'd believed she'd stood by me. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she stopped by to drop something off for our daughter, Sophia. Maybe she was meeting Tyler to discuss some family thing. But that sinking feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. I stepped out of my car, keeping low as I made my way toward the house. The blinds in the front window were open just enough to glimpse inside. What I saw, what I heard, should have been impossible. Elaine was lounging casually on Sophia's living room couch, legs crossed, that same confident smile I'd fallen in love with years ago resting easily on her lips. Beside her stood Tyler, leaning against the bookshelf, his tone casual, but his words as sharp as broken glass. "Once the old man signs the papers," he said, "everything we planned for will fall right into place." Elaine laughed, a soft, delicate sound that once felt like music to me. "David has no clue," she said, brushing imaginary lint off her designer slacks. "He's been too busy working himself to death to notice anything. The man practically handed us everything on a silver platter." The room spun. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I had to hold on to the side of the house to keep from falling. This wasn't just infidelity. It was treason. Treason wrapped in the familiar voices of people I loved, people I trusted, people I would have laid down my life for. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and hit record, forcing myself to stay silent, to gather every word, every damning detail. Tyler, in that clinical, legal tone of his, began listing off assets like he was reading a grocery list. The business, Martin Construction, was worth over $12 million. The lake house, the rental properties, the investments, even the classic Mustang in our garage, they'd already tallied it all up. They weren't just planning to take half. They were planning to take everything. I should have stormed in. I should have demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I backed away from the window like a man escaping a crime scene, heart pounding, breath ragged, phone still recording. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, hands that had built homes, repaired roofs in the dead of winter, signed paychecks for loyal employees, and cradled the woman I thought I'd grow old with. Now they trembled, not from fear, from rage, from clarity. You see, betrayal doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't wear a black cloak or wave a flag. It smiles at you from across the dinner table. It laughs with your children. It kisses you goodnight and tells you everything is fine. And then one day, it parks your wife's car in your son-in-law's driveway and dares you to find out the truth. That was the day I stopped being the trusting husband. That was the day I started becoming something else entirely. Something colder, smarter, ruthless, if need be. Because if they were going to play chess, they should have known not to bring a man who built empires with nothing but blueprints and willpower to a game of deception. They thought I was the mark. They were wrong. And now, I was going to prove it. I sat motionless in the car for what must have been 15 minutes, though it could have been hours. Time had lost meaning the second Elaine's voice floated through that half-open window like poison mist. "He actually thinks I love him." That sentence played in a loop, burrowing deeper into my brain until it etched itself behind my eyes. The betrayal was not just marital. It was existential. It wasn't just that she'd lied. It was that she'd done so with performance-level finesse for 2.5 decades, all while slowly mapping the architecture of my ruin. Every Sunday dinner, every weekend getaway, every whispered I love you in the dark, they weren't memories anymore. They were data points in a long con. And Tyler, my son-in-law, the man who toasted me at my retirement gala, who called me a mentor, a role model, that smug bastard had his fingerprints all over this scheme like it was a courtroom exhibit. I looked down at the phone in my lap. The voice recorder app was still running. 43 minutes. Crystal clear audio. Voices, dates, asset lists, legal strategies, their laughter. I saved the file and backed it up to the cloud, then to a flash drive I kept hidden in the glove compartment. Years in construction had taught me one thing: always keep a backup plan, even when you're pouring the foundation. The front door creaked open just as I reached for the ignition. Elaine stepped outside first, her handbag swinging lightly from her wrist as though she didn't just declare war on our marriage. Tyler followed a step behind, adjusting his tie, his phone already in hand. They didn't see me at first. I was sitting low in the driver's seat, heart steady now, cold, focused. But the second Elaine's gaze met mine, something in her face shifted. It was like watching a glass of red wine topple in slow motion, graceful, inevitable, disastrous. "David?" she called, her voice climbing an octave too high. "What are you doing here?" I stepped out of the car slowly, careful not to let my face betray anything more than mild surprise. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light, conversational. "Just finished a site visit about a mile down. Thought I'd drop in and see if Sophia was around." I scanned the front of the house with practiced ease. "But seems like I wasn't the only one with that idea." Elaine's eyes darted toward Tyler, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw panic. Not fear of me, fear of what I might have seen, of what I might now know. Tyler recovered first, stepping forward with that courtroom cadence he probably practiced in front of mirrors. "Sophia's not here," he said smoothly. "Just some legal paperwork your wife was helping me organize for a client." "Client work on a Saturday?" I raised an eyebrow. "You lawyers really don't sleep, huh?" Elaine forced a laugh, but it cracked at the edges. "I left work early," she added too quickly. "Had a headache. Just wanted to get a jump on the Henderson proposal." I tilted my head. "That was this morning, wasn't it? I thought you said you had meetings until 6. Her smile faltered, only for a second, but long enough to register. Tyler stepped subtly closer to her, a protective move that felt both inappropriate and unintentionally revealing. I let it hang in the air a second longer than was comfortable, then checked the time on my phone, making sure they saw it. "Well," I said with deliberate calm, "I'll leave you two to it. Didn't mean to interrupt anything." "You didn't," Elaine said quickly. "We were just finishing up." "Good timing, then." I opened the car door, but paused. "Oh, by the way, Elaine, Dr. Patel's office called." "Something about rescheduling your physical?" Said it conflicted with your work calendar. Her expression went blank totally, eerily blank for one breathless second before she recovered with that practiced grace I'd once mistaken for charm. "Must be a clerical error," she said. "I'll call them Monday." "Sure, happens all the time." I got into the car, turned the key, and backed out of the driveway without looking back. Not that I needed to. I could see them both in the rearview mirror, frozen, close together, whispering urgently, their illusion of control slipping. By the time I made it home, the adrenaline had burned off, replaced by something colder, sharper. I parked in front of the house I'd built with my own hands in 1995, every nail, every floorboard, every architectural line, and it looked unfamiliar, like something someone else had made. Inside, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, performed, the furniture too perfect, the air too still. I walked past the framed photo from our wedding, Elaine in ivory silk, me in a rented tux, both of us glowing with what I'd once believed was real love. We'd met at a client Christmas party when she was a secretary, and I was a man with a dream running a construction company out of the back of a borrowed pickup. She'd laughed at my bad concrete joke. I thought it meant something. Now I realize it was just good timing. I moved through the living room, past the photo shelves, past the baby pictures of Sophia, past the anniversary cards that now read like lines from a screenplay. I sat in my leather recliner, the one Elaine always said didn't match her aesthetic, and stared at nothing. Until now, I'd thought betrayal was a moment, a single crack. But this wasn't that. This was erosion, slow, methodical, planned. Everything I'd built financially, emotionally, structurally was now in jeopardy. Not because I'd made a mistake, but because I'd trusted the wrong people. But trust, like concrete, only fails when the foundation is weak. And my foundation? It was steel reinforced. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I'd be easy to outmaneuver. They were wrong. I wasn't going to blow up. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to document, to prepare, to calculate. Elaine and Tyler had turned this into a game of strategy, and I was about to show them just how dangerous a builder can be when you try to demolish what he created. They wanted war. Fine. But I wasn't bringing a sword. I was bringing the blueprints. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay in the dark beside Elaine, her breathing slow and even, like someone with nothing to fear, while my own mind stayed wide awake, racing through timelines, conversations, spending patterns, subtle behavioral shifts I'd overlooked for years. The pieces were all there, scattered through time like breadcrumbs I'd never thought to follow. Her sudden interest in my financial reports last year, the questions about business valuations, the insistence on joint accounts while quietly keeping her own private credit cards, the way she downplayed milestones like the Morrison Municipal Center contract, the biggest deal of my career, signed in 2020. I'd come home that day expecting celebration, maybe even a bottle of champagne. Instead, she'd been sitting at the kitchen island with a real estate magazine and a calculator, already spending the money I hadn't even collected yet. "We can finally get the Elm Street house," she'd said without looking up. "The one with the fountain and the circular driveway. The Hendersons are asking $4.2 million. No, congratulations. No, you did it. Just a shopping list of demands that had nothing to do with what I'd achieved. That should have been the moment I knew. But I didn't. Because I was in love. Because I believed we were a team. Because I mistook consumption for partnership. By the next morning, my mind had shifted fully into business mode. Grief was still there, of course lurking under the surface like a hairline crack in a steel beam, but it had been overtaken by something sharper. Focus, strategy. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. I started by calling Richard Hale my accountant, my friend, and the only person who knew about the offshore accounts I'd established years ago for tax optimization. Completely legal, fully documented, invisible to anyone without forensic-level access. "I need to activate contingency protocols," I told him, "and I need it quiet." Richard didn't ask why. He knew the tone in my voice. The last time I'd used it, we were renegotiating a multi-million-dollar contract after a partner tried to pull a fast one. "Give me a few hours," he said. "I'll be in touch by lunch." While he worked on the financial side, I turned to something more primal: surveillance. I called Kevin Tran, a former cop turned private investigator. We'd used him before to run background checks on subcontractors, but this was different. "I need eyes on two people," I said. "Elaine Martin and Tyler Evans. Discreet but thorough. I want to know where they go, who they meet, what they spend." Kevin didn't flinch. "Understood. You want live updates or end-of-day summaries?" "Both." Next came the bank. I set a meeting with Paul Simmons, president of First Horizon Bank and my golfing buddy for over a decade. We met in a private conference room with thick glass walls and deeper history. "Paul, I need a comprehensive security review of all accounts, personal, joint, business-related. And I want every joint access point frozen until further notice." He looked up sharply. "This is serious." "It is." "Does Elaine know?" "She will right after her card gets declined at lunch." Up. By noon, the holds were active. Any attempt to move funds, access savings, or make transfers now required in-person verification with 2 forms of ID and my signature. I didn't need to wait long for the fallout. At 12:03 p.m., my phone buzzed with a transaction alert. Elaine's credit card had been declined at Riverside Country Club. At 12:08, another alert. Attempted transfer from a joint savings account blocked. At 12:16, a voicemail from Elaine, voice tight with a kind of panic she hadn't used in years. "David, I don't know what's going on, but I can't access our accounts. My card just got declined in front of Linda and Susan. This is beyond embarrassing. Call me." I didn't. Instead, I listened to the message twice and saved it. By 2 o'clock, Kevin Tran had already compiled a partial spending report. The pattern was as obvious as it was infuriating. Over the last 8 months, Elaine had quietly funneled nearly $50,000 into a savings account. I'd never authorized an account with Tyler Evans listed as a joint beneficiary. Spa days, designer bags, overpriced lunches, all masked as book club expenses or charity donations. And then there were the charges on weekends when she was supposedly out of town visiting her sister. Hotel suites in Des Moines, candlelit dinners, jewelry from a boutique Tyler's firm just happened to represent in a recent contract. It wasn't just betrayal. It was accounting. Tyler, on the other hand, was a mess in a suit. Kevin's background check pulled up debts I hadn't even imagined. Student loans north of $180,000. A luxury office he leased to impress clients but couldn't afford to furnish. Delays in paying subcontractors. Complaints filed with the Bar Association, 2 of which had already been dismissed, but left a stain nonetheless. The man who planned to bleed me dry was barely solvent himself. That night, I sat in my office, the same room where I'd written the first business plan for Martin Construction. 2 laptops were open in front of me. One showed my original asset map. The other showed Elaine's version, drawn from clues, receipts, and her own sloppy reconnaissance. Her diagram was child's play. Mine was war. Yellow legal pads filled every surface, columns labeled leverage, exposure, timeline, contingency. I wore a navy suit, and reading glasses, Elaine once said, made me look distinguished. Funny. Now they made me look dangerous. By the time the sun set, I drafted the beginnings of a legal fortress. The offshore accounts were activated, the automatic payments shut down, and the phone lines secured. I was no longer trying to protect what was mine. I was preparing to expose what was theirs. They thought they were dealing with a man too blinded by routine to see the trap forming around him. But I built this house, this empire, every inch of it, and if they wanted to burn it down, they were going to find themselves trapped inside the matchbox. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I was weak. The foundation was about to shift, and I was the one holding the blueprints. The call came just after 9 a.m., the morning after I'd frozen every joint account and locked down access to our financial infrastructure. Sophia's name lit up my phone screen, and for the first time in days, I hesitated to answer. Not because I didn't want to speak with her, but because I didn't know how much she knew, or worse, how much she'd been told. I took a breath and forced calm into my voice. "Hey, sweetheart." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her tone was cautious, clipped in a way that reminded me of her graduate school days, when every conversation was laced with diagnostic precision. "Is everything okay between you and Mom lately?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the morning light fall across the blueprint. Sprawled across my desk, the same blueprint we used to renovate City Hall 2 years ago. The project that sparked Elaine's obsession with bigger houses and flashier friends. "That's a complicated question," I said, choosing my words like a surgeon choosing which tissue to cut. "Why do you ask?" There was a pause on the line. "Because Mom's been acting strange, nervous. She says you're being controlling about money. She couldn't pay for lunch yesterday, said her cards were declined. And Tyler," her voice trailed off, then picked back up, firmer. "He's been asking me all sorts of weird questions about your company, about assets, about who controls what. It doesn't feel right." I closed my eyes, feeling a flicker of something between pride and pain. My daughter had always been sharp. From the moment she could read, she asked questions most adults were afraid to. "Do you think they're fishing for information?" I asked carefully, not wanting to lead her, but needing confirmation. "That's exactly what it feels like," she said. "But why would they do that?" I thought. She stopped. I could hear her struggling to align what she felt with what she feared. "Is something going on, Dad? Like, really going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, to play her the recording right then and there. But this wasn't a moment for impulse. It was a moment for precision. "I'm handling a situation," I said slowly. "And I promise you I'll explain everything soon. But right now, I need you to stay neutral. Just observe. Don't tip your hand. Can you do that for me?" She hesitated. "Yeah, but if you're in trouble—" "I'm not," I cut in gently. I'm in control. After we hung up, I knew the clock had officially started ticking. Elaine and Tyler wouldn't sit idle. The failed transactions, the frozen accounts, they were already spinning a new narrative, and I had no doubt that narrative painted me as the villain. Sure enough, that afternoon, my secure line rang. Megan Liu, my accountant of 12 years and the only person I trusted with the real numbers. David, she said, I've drafted the asset protection paperwork you asked for. It insulates Martin Construction and your core properties from any personal legal actions. But tell me, should I be worried? Only if I don't act fast, I replied. This is about more than estate planning. It's a preemptive strike. Megan's silence said more than words. She'd seen this before. Divorce cases tangled with corporate structure, asset redirection masked as equity disputes. I'll have everything filed and notarized by noon, she said. You'll be untouchable by dinner. At 10 a.m. sharp, I met Paul Simmons at the bank for an internal review. The conference room smelled of wood polish and fresh coffee. This level of lockdown, Paul said, flipping through the documents, will signal to everyone involved that something serious is happening. That's the idea, I said. Let them think I'm panicking. Let them underestimate me. By 11:47 a.m., the last of the account restrictions had gone live. Margaret's World credit cards, spending accounts, emergency lines shut down with surgical precision. By 12:03, another declined charge. By 12:18, her first voicemail. By 12:50, a phone call shrill, performative, tight with social embarrassment. David, something's wrong with the accounts. I tried to pay for lunch at the club and everything was declined. I'm sitting here with Linda and Susan. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I didn't mention the $47,000 she moved, or the account with Tyler's name on it, or the fact that every dollar she'd redirected had already been traced, documented, and duplicated across 3 encrypted drives. Sounds serious, I said. Let me call Paul and see what's going on. But I didn't call Paul. I called Kevin. By 4:30, Kevin Tran had eyes on Tyler. Your boy's having a bad day, he said through a chuckle. Tried to access 2 different accounts, one in your wife's name, one joint, both locked. Then he tried to withdraw from what looks like a college trust fund. Also blocked. He's making noise, angry phone calls, threats about lawsuits. Classic panic response. I let out a low breath, half relief, half disgust. Let him flail, I said. Let him scream into the void. That night, the house was quiet again. Not peaceful, just silent in the way an empty ballroom is silent, after the music stops. Elaine hadn't come home yet. Or maybe she had, and was pretending to sleep in the guest room to avoid conversation. Either way, I didn't go looking for her. Instead, I reviewed the last 2 days' worth of surveillance logs, payment histories, GPS movement maps, and Kevin's time-stamped photo roll. It was all their proof of a conspiracy, carefully plotted and poorly executed. And just as I was about to close my laptop, my phone buzzed again. A text from Kevin. Elaine just pulled up outside Tyler's office. She's not using the back entrance this time. Attached, a photo of her walking quickly, almost running, hair disheveled, phone to her ear, face tight with anxiety. I zoomed in and stared at the image for a long time. There was no more poise, no more performance, just panic. Good, let them sweat. What they didn't know, what neither of them could possibly guess, was that I wasn't reacting. I was documenting, watching, setting the trap. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed clarity, evidence, momentum. Let them keep moving pieces on their board. Let them think they're the ones dictating tempo. They're playing poker with a man who's already seen their cards. And now, the next move was mine. By the time Saturday morning rolled around, I'd mapped out every angle, every move, every weak joint in the structure of their little betrayal, and all I had to do now was apply pressure slowly, precisely, like a builder checking for cracks in concrete with nothing but a hammer and instinct. I didn't need to break anything yet. I just needed to remind them how unstable their foundation had become. And as it turned out, Elaine was already showing the first signs of collapse. Kevin texted me at 10:22 a.m. Your wife's at Cafe Luna. Monthly brunch with your daughter. Private corner table. Same routine as usual. I've got eyes and ears nearby. That text told me everything I needed to know. Elaine wasn't just keeping up appearances, she was trying to control the narrative. She was going to try to manipulate Sophia, our daughter, into believing I was the threat, into believing her mother was the victim. It was a predictable move, the kind of psychological sleight of hand that only works on people who want to believe the illusion. But she'd miscalculated. Because Sophia was no longer the wide-eyed girl who clung to bedtime stories and warm hugs. She was 30 now, a licensed psychologist, with a sharp mind and a sharper sense of emotional truth. And Elaine was about to walk into a conversation she thought she could control. Kevin's surveillance feed gave him a snippet. Not words, just body language, posture, tone. Elaine hunched slightly across the table, clutching her coffee like it might anchor her to something real. Sophia, straight-backed, elbows on the table, eyes narrowed in concern. Not emotion, concern, clinical concern. I imagined the words as they might have unfolded. Your father's changed. I think something's wrong. He's been controlling, distant, paranoid. The usual script, softened by maternal worry, weaponized through false vulnerability. But Sophia wasn't a passive audience anymore. She'd been trained to deconstruct emotional narratives, to spot manipulative framing. When she asked, "What triggered this behavior?" I imagined Elaine hesitating, because the answer truthfully was that I had finally caught them, but instead she would offer deflections. I don't know, maybe work stress, or something about his health. He's different. But difference doesn't equate to danger, and Sophia would see that. She always had. 20 minutes later, Kevin confirmed the result. Your daughter left early. Not angry, not emotional, just done, like she was finished collecting data. I nodded to myself. Sophia was drawing her own conclusions, and those conclusions weren't lining up with her mother's script. I didn't call her. I didn't interfere. I trusted her to find her way through the fog, just like I had. And besides, I had my own battlefield to monitor. At 1:15 p.m., a different kind of message arrived, this time from Jim Morrison, a longtime subcontractor and one of the few men I trusted to speak plainly. Heard something you'd want to know, he'd written. Tyler Evans is in trouble with the state bar. Complaints filed by subcontractors, non-payment, mishandled trust funds. Could be serious. My stomach didn't turn. My pulse didn't spike. I just felt validated. The mask was slipping. Tyler's shiny veneer of legal professionalism had been stretched too thin for too long, and now it was cracking. I followed up with 3 phone calls of my own quiet conversations with vendors, electricians, roofers, tradesmen who'd had the misfortune of trusting Tyler to process payments he never made. One by one, they confirmed the same pattern. Invoices submitted, excuses offered, deadlines missed, payments withheld. Tyler had been floating his image on other people's money, and he was about to drown in it. By 3 p.m., I had everything I needed. Names, amounts, dates, even email records from subcontractors forwarding Tyler's broken promises and canned excuses. I compiled it all into a formal complaint package, complete with notarized witness statements, and submitted it to the State Bar Association's ethical complaint line by 4:15. By 4:47, Kevin texted again. Tyler just left the office with 3 boxes of files, notebooks, folders, some loose paper. Looked like panic mode. I smiled for the first time all day. He was heading straight for Elaine. I didn't need GPS to know that. When rats flee a sinking ship, they swim toward the nearest familiar dock. Let them scramble. Let them argue. Let the tension split them from the inside. I didn't need to knock down the house. I just had to wait for the termites to finish the job. By Sunday evening, the air had changed. Not just in my house, but in the town itself. Elaine's social calendar, once overflowing with brunches, galas, and charity events, had gone curiously silent. The phones weren't ringing. The invitations weren't arriving. Even the Riverside Country Club, her sacred temple of image management, had quietly updated its membership list, citing status under review. And Tyler? He was bleeding clients. Word had spread about the investigation. Miller Industries dropped him without ceremony. The Crawfords canceled their contract, and several of his remaining cases were requesting itemized trust fund records, which, of course, he couldn't produce. But it was the conversation I had Monday morning that told me everything was finally tipping. Sophia arrived at my office at 9:30 sharp, her expression unreadable, her steps measured and steady. She didn't knock, just walked in and closed the door behind her. "We need to talk," she said. I set my coffee down slowly. "About your mother?" "About both of them." She sat across from me, hands folded, posture clinical. "She told me you were losing control, that you'd cut her off, become paranoid, maybe even dangerous." I waited. "And what do you believe?" She exhaled. "I believe you're protecting yourself. I believe Tyler's been using me for weeks to get information about the company. And I believe Mom's not a victim. She's the architect." I nodded once. No celebration. No triumph. Just relief. "There's a recording," I said quietly. "I want you to hear it, but I won't push you." "Play it," she said. And so I did. I let her hear Elaine's voice, clear as glass, talking about how the old fool had no idea, about playing the long game, about pretending to care, to love, to believe. I watched my daughter absorb the truth, not just with her ears, but with her whole being. No tears, no outbursts, just a quiet death behind the eyes as a version of her family she had always believed in finally disintegrated. When the audio ended, she didn't move for a long time. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 6 days. "And you've been building a defense the whole time?" "Not just a defense," I said. "A strategy." She stood slowly. "I'm divorcing him," she said. "And I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for me. For the integrity of the work I've built. He tried to use me as a weapon against you. That ends today." She walked to the door, paused, then turned back. "But I'm not going to be your weapon either, Dad. Don't use me to destroy them." "I won't," I promised. "But I might need you to tell the truth. Just the truth." "Then I'll be there," she said, "in court, if it comes to that." And just like that, the lines were drawn, the battlefield was set, and for the first time since this war began, I felt something like hope return to the room. Sophia didn't go home that night. She told me she needed a few hours to think, to be alone, to let everything settle, but I knew what that meant. It meant she was preparing not emotionally, not sentimentally, but tactically. She had grown up watching me manage men and money with equal precision, watching her mother play hostess in pearls while reading the room like a senator. And now, all that conditioning was crystallizing into something dangerous, measured, principled, clear-eyed. So when she finally walked through the front door of her own house at 7:30 the next evening, she was ready. Tyler was sprawled on the living room couch, legal files spread out in front of him, a whiskey glass sweating into a coaster he never used before we were married. He didn't even look up when she walked in. "Barrett deposition got postponed again," he muttered without greeting. "Might be heading to trial after all." She didn't sit. She didn't drop her bag. She didn't even remove her coat. "I know everything," she said, quietly, firmly. And that was enough to make his entire body go still. He looked up then, and the mask he wore for courtrooms and client meetings, the one made of charm and certainty and self-assurance, cracked. "What are you talking about?" "The recording," she said. "The one my father made. The one where you and my mother planned to financially ruin him. The one where you laughed about how blind he was while calculating what you'd steal." Tyler didn't speak. He just stared. And for the first time since she'd met him, Sophia saw it panic without strategy, guilt without language. "You used me," she continued. "Used my training, my career, my love, to build a false narrative you could present in court. You were going to frame my father as an abuser, and you were going to use my profession as evidence." "It wasn't like that," he finally whispered. "I was trying to protect yourself," she cut in. "Don't insult me. Just tell me the truth. Was any of our marriage real?" He looked away, and that was the only answer she needed. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just turned around, left the room, and closed the door behind her as gently as if she were tucking away the last remnants of a life she no longer recognized. While that confrontation played out in Tyler's apartment like the final act of a failed play, Elaine was fighting a different kind of collapse, one that came not with fury, but with silence. At Riverside Country Club, where she'd once floated through brunches and benefit meetings with a champagne flute in hand and a compliment for everyone's shoes, the energy had shifted. Subtle at first. People who smiled a beat too late. Conversations that hushed as she approached. but by Saturday the whispers had become avoidance. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner of 5 years, suddenly needed to run a quick errand mid-conversation. Susan Morrison took a call from the vet rather than let Elaine sit at the same table, and Janet Crawford's sweet, sharp Janet offered the final cut with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've had to make some changes on the planning committee," she said. "I'm sure you understand, with everything going on." "Everything?" Elaine asked, voice rising half a note. "What exactly is going on?" "I'm sure you know," Janet replied softly. And just like that, the social scaffolding Elaine had built her entire identity upon the brunches, the fundraisers, the garden parties. The illusions began to collapse under the weight of a truth she could no longer control. At the same time, I was quietly conducting my own campaign, not one of revenge, but of revelation. I wasn't trying to destroy Elaine. I was simply making sure that the truth traveled faster than the lies. A few casual lunches, a handful of well-placed conversations, just enough facts to create context, just enough honesty to create discomfort. At the Chamber of Commerce meeting that week, when Jim Morrison asked why Elaine hadn't attended the spring gala, I answered with nothing more than a sigh and a sentence. "Sometimes you think you know someone after 25 years, and then you realize you don't." I didn't elaborate. I didn't accuse. I let the weight of ambiguity do the work. By the time dinner was served, 3 people had already pieced together most of the truth, and 2 more offered to catch up over coffee sometime soon. Meanwhile, Tyler's law firm was unraveling in real time. Miller Industries terminated their $200,000 contract via formal letter, citing concerns about ethical integrity. The Crawfords sent a polite notice of disengagement. Even the local legal listserv began to buzz with rumors of disciplinary review. By Sunday, Tyler's name had become radioactive, and he knew it. He tried to call me that evening. Once. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. Nothing he could offer. Nothing I needed. The man who had tried to destroy me with strategy and subterfuge was now stumbling through damage control like a first-year associate caught lying on his resume. Then came Monday. Elaine, in full desperation, walked into the office of Linda Hawthorne Davenport's most aggressive divorce attorney and a woman known for winning ugly. Her office overlooked the courthouse, and Elaine probably thought the symbolism meant something, but Linda was sharp enough to recognize a bad case when she saw one. "Your husband's financial lockdown is legal," she told Elaine after reviewing the documentation. "Every account you jointly held has proper protocols. He didn't steal from you. He protected marital assets during a clear breakdown in trust." "It's abuse," Elaine insisted. "He's controlling everything." "He's punishing me." "Can you prove that?" Linda asked. "Can you document threats, physical intimidation, isolation? Has he prevented you from accessing communication or transportation?" "No, but—" "Then it's not abuse. It's a financial boundary during legal uncertainty." Elaine's face flushed with the realization that even her own attorney didn't believe her. "Then we'll reframe it," she said coldly. "We'll focus on emotional manipulation, dependency, control." "Do you have evidence of that?" Linda asked. "Or just a narrative?" And there it was, the end of the line. Because all Elaine had left was story, and I had the tape. 10 blocks away, the Bar Association's ethics board was preparing its hearing for Tyler Evans. They'd already reviewed my formal complaint, backed by invoices, emails, and sworn statements from subcontractors who had been left unpaid for months while Tyler redirected their funds to cover his own lifestyle. His resourceful management was, by their standards, misappropriation of client trust accounts, a charge that could end a legal career in one swift vote. And that vote was coming fast. By Wednesday night, both Elaine and Tyler were out of moves. Their reputations, one social, one professional, had deteriorated under the pressure of truth, and the public face they'd worn for years was slipping in chunks. That night, Kevin Tran texted me one last photo. The 2 of them sitting in a conference room, heads bent, faces pale, documents spread out like a battlefield map that no longer made sense. "They're cooked," he wrote, "and they know it." I stared at that image, not with triumph, but with clarity. The storm they'd set in motion had circled back around, and now they were standing in the eye. By Thursday morning, they were out of subtlety. The desperation had metastasized into recklessness, and the two of them, Elaine and Tyler, finally made their move. It was clumsy, premature, and legally suicidal, but desperation doesn't draft blueprints, it throws dynamite. They filed an emergency restraining order against me in family court, citing financial abuse, emotional intimidation, and controlling behavior. The petition was signed by Elaine, crafted by Tyler, and submitted as a last-ditch attempt to seize the house, the accounts, the public narrative. It was their final Hail Mary, a sudden blitz to confuse the court and force me onto the defensive, hoping to paralyze my access to my own estate before the evidence could catch up to their lies. But what they didn't understand, what they still hadn't grasped even after everything, was that this wasn't a reaction anymore. It was a trap, and they'd just stepped into the center of it. The hearing was scheduled within 24 hours, as these things often are. Domestic Relations Court, Judge Rachel Ellis, veteran of 30 years on the bench, known for tolerating neither theatrics nor hearsay. She'd seen every flavor of family manipulation pass through her courtroom, and she had a gift for dissecting motive from narrative. I showed up in a tailored charcoal suit and brought nothing with me except one phone, one flash drive, and one attorney, Benjamin Clark, quiet, sharp, and deadly precise. Elaine arrived dressed in the obligatory uniform of the frightened spouse muted dress. No jewelry, minimal makeup, eyes downcast just enough to suggest fragility without weakness. She sat at the plaintiff's table with Linda Hawthorne beside her, hands folded in practiced stillness. And then there was Tyler sitting a row back, face flushed, jaw locked, as if he couldn't quite believe he was being forced to spectate the finale of his own performance. Judge Ellis wasted no time. Mrs. Martin, you allege financial abuse, intimidation, and emotional coercion by your husband. Please provide specific incidents that caused you to fear for your safety. Elaine's voice trembled, but not from fear. It was the tremble of someone who knows she has no facts and too many eyes watching. He restricted my access to all our joint accounts without notice. He threatened to leave me with nothing. He's used money as a weapon. Has he ever threatened you physically? Number. Prevented you from leaving the home? Number. Monitored your communications? Not exactly, but have you been denied access to transportation, medical care, or legal representation? No, but... So your claim is based entirely on financial decisions made during a marital separation. Elaine faltered. Yes, but they were meant to control me, to punish me. Judge Ellis turned to Benjamin. Response? Benjamin stood without notes. He didn't need them. Your Honor, we intend to show that Mrs. Martin's allegations are not only false, but part of a deliberate scheme documented in full to defraud my client of his assets through strategic manipulation and bad faith legal tactics. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're claiming fraud? I'm offering proof. Benjamin inserted the flash drive into the court's audio console. Exhibit A, a 43-minute recording made by Mr. Martin documenting a private conversation between Mrs. Martin and her alleged co-conspirator, Mr. Tyler Evans. And then, Elaine's voice filled the courtroom. That same voice that once whispered vows now played over tinny speakers, cool and cruel. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. There was a sound in the room then, not quite a gasp, but a collective shift. Air being drawn inward by people trying to stay still. The recording went on. Tyler listing assets. Elaine mocking my trust. Their laughter. Their timeline. Their strategy. And worst of all, the part about Sophia. We'll use her credentials. Reframe the story. She'll support it because she won't know any better. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Judge Ellis looked directly at Elaine. Do you deny this is your voice? Elaine didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Linda Hawthorne leaned in, whispering furiously, but even she looked pale. Your Honor, Benjamin said calmly, we request immediate dismissal of the restraining order and referral to the district attorney's office for possible perjury and fraudulent filing. So ordered, Judge Ellis replied, her gavel striking once cleanly. Petition denied with prejudice. The matter will be forwarded for investigation. She turned to Linda. Counsel, if you were unaware of this recording when filing the petition, you are excused. If not, expect an inquiry. Linda stood slowly. I move to withdraw from representation. Granted. And just like that, it was over. Not with fireworks, not with violence, but with facts. Elaine's hands shook as she gathered her things. Tyler stood in the hallway, waiting for her, but she didn't meet his eyes. Because something had broken between them now, something permanent. Mutual destruction has a way of doing that. When lies collapse, they collapse inward. I walked out of the courthouse into the May sunlight, not victorious, not triumphant, but clean, free. The truth had done its work, and now it was time to rebuild. But not for them, for me. 2 weeks later, the divorce proceedings concluded swiftly. The prenuptial agreement, long forgotten by Elaine, resurfaced with devastating clarity. She received no spousal support. Her share of assets was minimal, just what was agreed upon 25 years earlier. Tyler's law license was suspended, then permanently revoked after the Bar Association confirmed over $127,000 in misused client funds. Last I heard, he moved to Nebraska, working as a paralegal under a different name. Sophia filed for divorce the same week, citing irreconcilable differences and ethical betrayal. She's rebuilding her life slowly, carefully, with a clinical clarity that reminds me of the woman her mother once pretended to be. Elaine? She's back in Davenport, working retail at a boutique inside the same mall where she once spent my money like it had no end. I walked past her once, by accident. She didn't look up. And me? I'm still in the house I built with my own hands, still running Martin Construction, stronger now than before. Business is thriving. Clients returned. Partners showed up. People believed me. Not because I demanded it, but because the truth, when recorded, doesn't stutter. The evenings are quiet now. Not lonely. Just honest. There's no more theater. No more forced smiles. No more wondering what's hidden behind a compliment or a kiss. Just windows that let in light, walls that don't echo with performance, and rooms that feel like mine again. The house is smaller than it used to feel, but somehow it holds more peace. And in the silence I don't hear betrayal anymore. I hear the sound of survival, of a man who rebuilt not just a home but himself. It's strange how silence feels different once the war ends. Not the kind of silence that comes with loneliness, but the kind that arrives like a guest who doesn't knock, who simply lets itself in and makes itself at home. For weeks after the final hearing, after the gavel came down and the last document was signed and notarized, the house felt quieter than I remembered. Not because anyone had left, it had been just me for some time, but because something had finally stopped humming in the walls. There was no more deception vibrating beneath the surface, no more carefully choreographed conversations, no more calculated affection echoing through the hallways. Just air, clean and honest. I woke up that first morning post-divorce to the sound of rain tapping against the bedroom window, soft, rhythmic, unpretentious, and realized I hadn't clenched my jaw in my sleep for the first time in months. No dreams of courtrooms. No voices from old recordings playing on loop. No visions of betrayal dressed as brunch. Just me, a man of 62, breathing evenly in a house I had built from nothing and taken back without raising my voice. The irony isn't lost on me that after decades of grinding in construction steel beams, cement mixers, city contracts, it was my own family I had to excavate piece by piece to find something solid again. Elaine's presence lingered in the furniture for a while. Not her body, those days were long gone, but her preferences. The paint color in the guest bathroom, the ridiculous faux crystal chandelier over the dining table, the throw pillows that no one was allowed to use, all artifacts of a performance I'd mistaken for partnership. I began changing them slowly, deliberately, not out of spite, but out of reclamation. The chandelier was the first to go. I replaced it with something clean, simple steel and glass, built for utility and quiet strength. I donated most of the art she'd picked, repainted the guest room in slate blue. Every change was like chiseling away old plaster to find the original structure underneath my structure. And with every brushstroke, every haul to the donation center, I felt something return to me that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Authorship over my own space, over my own peace. Sophia came by often. At first she brought small talk and casseroles, worried, I think, that I was drifting into isolation. But eventually the conversations grew deeper, honest, necessary. She told me about her divorce filing, how Tyler tried to send one final text message filled with half apologies and manipulative half truths, and how she blocked his number before even reading the last line. "I'm not angry anymore," she said one night over coffee at the kitchen island. "I'm just done, and I think that's scarier for him than rage ever was." She started building her own practice now, family therapy, with a specialization in manipulation recovery. I helped her renovate the office space last month. She chose every detail herself: furniture, colors, lighting, no compromises. I watched her open the door to her first client last Tuesday, and for the first time since all this began, I felt something more than survival. I felt pride, real pride, the kind you can't fake for a photo or stage for a social media post, the kind that stays. As for Elaine, I hear things now and then, that she's still working retail in that boutique at the Westfield Mall, that her social circle has shrunk to a tight, uncomfortable knot of people who haven't figured out how to distance themselves without making it obvious, that she shows up at charity events sometimes and leaves halfway through claiming headaches. I'm not cruel enough to wish her pain, but I no longer lie to myself about what she deserves. Actions like architecture leave a footprint, and when you spend decades pouring your energy into deception, eventually you have to live in the building you've constructed. She built hers out of glass, and glass shatters. Tyler's name hasn't come up in months, except once when I got a letter from a mutual contact in Nebraska who said he'd been hired as a paralegal under a different firm, under a different name. He's out of the legal profession for good, stripped of his credentials, his license, and his illusion of invincibility. And maybe that's punishment enough. Maybe not. Either way, I don't care. He's no longer a threat. He's just another man who mistook cleverness for character and lost everything that mattered because of it. I don't date. People ask sometimes, well-meaning friends, old colleagues, neighbors, who can't stand the idea of someone being content alone. But I am, deeply, quietly, content. My life isn't about filling space anymore. It's about clearing it, about honoring it. I cook dinner in a kitchen that no longer feels like a stage. I read in the evenings under a lamp I picked myself. I walk through my backyard and remember planting each tree, each rose bush, with my own hands, not for display, but for permanence. The things I build now are smaller, but they're mine. Sometimes I still listen to the recording, not out of spite, not to torture myself, but to remember, to ground myself in the clarity of what was said and what was intended. Betrayal has a way of making you question your own memory, your own instincts, your own worth. But when you hear it recorded, documented, undeniable, you stop asking, was it really that bad? And start saying, yes. And I survived it. That's what the tape is now. Not a wound, a record, a ledger of truth. And that's what this house has become again, a record of truth. Not a mansion filled with illusions, not a trophy of status built for someone else's ambition, just a home. Mine, honest and earned. I built it once with my hands, and I rebuilt it with my pain. I don't know what the future holds. I don't need to. The past taught me that you can lose everything and still come back whole as long as you don't let bitterness build walls where boundaries should be. As long as you remember that peace isn't the absence of betrayal. It's what you reclaim when betrayal is gone. Some days I wonder what would have happened if I'd never stopped the car that afternoon, if I'd just driven past Tyler's house without noticing Elaine's Lexus in the driveway, without creeping toward the window, without pressing record on my phone. What if I'd believed Sophia's cheery lie, taken her at her word that Tyler was just working on case files, and gone about my evening none the wiser? What if I'd taken Elaine's excuses at face value, dismissed the tension in her voice as stress, chalked up the distance between us to age and routine instead of design? Would I still be living in that lie now, applauding her at fundraisers, toasting Tyler at family dinners, smiling politely at jokes that no longer felt funny? It's a question that doesn't haunt me, but it visits, briefly, like a shadow passing over the sun. And every time it does, I find myself standing in the same place, the threshold of the workshop behind the house, the one I built with my father's tools, long before I had employees or contracts or $1 million to my name, back when sawdust on your jeans meant you'd built something with your own hands. That space became my sanctuary again, after the dust of the divorce settled not for construction but for memory, for stillness, for recalibrating the compass that betrayal tried to snap in half. Out there, I'm not David Martin, the man whose wife tried to ruin him, or David Martin, the guy with the recording. I'm just a man with a workbench, a project, and peace. That's where I kept the flash drive, too. The original, locked in a fireproof box behind a false panel in the tool cabinet. I haven't opened it in months, but I haven't thrown it away either. Because you don't erase truth, you archive it. There's something you learn when your trust is shattered, and it's this. You start measuring love differently, not by words or gestures or grand declarations, but by consistency, by the quiet, ordinary ways people show up. My circle's smaller now, intentionally. No more endless business lunches with people who only knew how to ask for favors. No more dinner parties hosted out of obligation, just a handful of people I trust who trust me in return. People who don't need explanations or performances. Sophia is one of them, of course. She stops by every Sunday now, sometimes bringing a book to read in the sunroom while I work in the yard. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just exist in the same space, her tapping away on case notes, me fixing a cabinet hinge or sanding a table. And those quiet Sundays mean more to me than most anniversaries I ever celebrated. They're real. No scripts, no angles, just presence. And I've learned to say no, too. Not rudely, just clearly. I don't entertain Elaine's cousin who called out of the blue last month, asking if I could sponsor a scholarship fund in her name. I don't respond to holiday cards from people who were silent during the scandal, who chose neutrality when I needed truth. I've earned the right to be selective, and I wear that right without apology. People mistake forgiveness for re-entry, but forgiveness isn't an invitation back. It's a boundary drawn in stone, not sand. I forgave Elaine. Not for her sake, she's never asked for it, but for mine, because resentment is heavy, and I had too much to carry already. I don't wish her harm. I just wish her elsewhere, and that's enough. Once in a while, someone from the old world still tries to explain her. They use words like lost or confused or driven by fear. And maybe all of that's true. Maybe Elaine got tired of being the wife of the builder and wanted to be the queen of something. Maybe Tyler was the spark she needed to believe she still had power. But explanation isn't the same as exoneration. And when someone maps out your destruction with a smile and a spreadsheet, they forfeit the privilege of being understood. I don't need to untangle her motives anymore. I just need to protect what's mine. The biggest surprise, though, is this. I'm not bitter. That's not bravado. That's not denial. It's just peace. Because once you walk through the fire, and you survive it with your integrity intact, you no longer feel small. You feel forged. And everything after that, every morning coffee, every quiet drive, every uninterrupted night's sleep feels like a luxury. I no longer need a full calendar to feel important. I don't measure my worth by invitations or accolades or someone else's admiration. I built a life. It was invaded, and I rebuilt it. That's the legacy, not the marriage, not the court case, not the gossip that passed through town like smoke in a gust of wind. The legacy is the rebuilding. I've started writing again, not for anyone else, just for me. Journal entries, reflections, sometimes just one line a day. Things like, you don't need someone to applaud your survival to call it victory, or the people who destroy your name will one day forget how to say it, or simply, still here. I don't know if I'll ever publish them. Maybe Sophia will read them one day when I'm gone and understand her father a little better. Or maybe they'll sit in the drawer of my desk until the wood turns soft and the ink fades. Either way, they serve their purpose. They remind me that voice doesn't disappear when trust is broken, it just learns to speak more clearly. This morning I walked out onto the back deck with a cup of black coffee and watched the sun rise over the cedar fence. The boards had weathered, turned silver with time. I ran my hand along the grain and smiled. Time doesn't erase scars, but it seasons them, makes them part of the wood, part of the story. And some stories don't need rewriting, just remembering. Sometimes I wonder if legacy is really something we leave behind or something we build quietly while no one's watching. Not the kind carved into plaques or engraved on office doors, but the kind etched into habits, into values, into the way someone remembers how we made them feel when they were uncertain. That thought comes to me now in the smallest moments. When I'm packing up old tools in the garage to send to a trade school downtown, when I get a thank you card from a young contractor I mentored years ago, now running his own crew. When Sophia calls just to talk not because anything's wrong, but because connection no longer requires a reason. That's the legacy I care about now. Not what I built on paper, not what was taken or protected, but what remained upright when everything else fell. What didn't bend under pressure. What stayed true. There was a time I thought my story would end with a quiet retirement, a house by the lake, dinners with family, grandchildren racing across the floor while Elaine poured wine in the kitchen. That vision is gone now, not mourned, just acknowledged, like a blueprint for a house we never built. And I've come to accept that some things were never real. They were rehearsals. Performances dressed as permanence. And the absence of that fantasy doesn't feel like loss anymore, it feels like clarity. These days, I spend more time outside, not doing anything particularly profound, just being in the space, watering the hedges, repainting the shed, watching the sun fold itself over the lawn like it's been doing for decades, indifferent to drama, to legal filings, to whispered betrayals. Nature doesn't lie. It only grows, or decays. But either way, it tells the truth. There's a tree in the corner of the yard, an oak I planted the year Sophia was born. I remember Elaine laughing at me back then, saying it would take too long to grow, that we'd be old by the time it gave any shade. She was right, in a way. It's only just now tall enough to cast a proper shadow over the deck. But that's the thing about oaks. They take their time. They don't rush toward the sky. They build underground first. Roots before branches. Strength before appearance. That tree didn't flinch during last year's storm. And I like to think, in some quiet metaphorical way, neither did I. There's a freedom that comes with no longer needing to explain yourself. When the people who doubted you finally fall silent not because you convinced them, but because time did. Time has a way of sorting truth from theater. And I no longer waste breath correcting misperceptions. Let people think what they want. Those who matter already know, and those who don't, well, they were never building anything with me to begin with. There is peace in that. Not the loud kind that comes with vindication, but the quiet kind that settles in your bones and doesn't need to be named. Sophia once asked me if I'd ever trust again. I told her, trust isn't a switch you flip, it's a structure you rebuild. Carefully, slowly, with stronger materials than before. I trust now, but differently. I trust in character, not charm. In patterns, not promises. In people who show up when there's nothing to gain. And in myself most of all, because I learned that even after the worst kind of betrayal, I didn't collapse. I didn't retaliate with cruelty. I didn't let them remake me into something small and bitter. I stood still, then I stood tall. And eventually I walked forward. One day, maybe, someone will ask me what this whole chapter of my life was about. Why I stayed calm. Why I documented instead of reacted. Why I didn't raise my voice, even when my heart was breaking. And I think I'll say this, because I had nothing to prove. Because my dignity was mine to keep. And because the loudest revenge is a life lived well, without apology, without performance, and without the people who thought you were weak enough to destroy. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced betrayal, rebuilt from heartbreak, or simply found strength in your own silence, then I invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that honor resilience, reveal hard truths, and explore the quiet power of standing your ground. We don't just tell stories here, we reveal the architecture of trust, the weight of consequence, and the dignity of starting over. Your support helps us continue creating content that values depth over drama and insight over noise. So if you believe in stories that matter, stories that aren't afraid to show both the wound and the healing, please take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what part of the story stayed with you. Because sometimes, all it takes is one true story to remind someone else that they're not alone. And sometimes, it takes a community like this to keep those stories alive. Thank you for being here.